Shalom, and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of a Shabbat teaching with Rabbi Adam Kligfeld.
You don't need a chumash because all the verses we're going to be looking at, and by all the verses I mean all the verse. The entire verse that we're going to be looking at least from the parshas on the sheet, and anything else we're going to be looking at as well. Okay. What did I tell you to remember?
It's hard to find things.
Hard to find the first line of Parshat Vayechi. Parshat Vayechi visually has a uniqueness in that it's the only parsha that is not broken from the previous parsha by any kind of a gap. Usually, right, if you think of the way the Torah scroll is laid out, there are ptuchot where the at the end of a sentence there's a clear break all the way to the end of the line, and the next paragraph, starts the next line, like the sofer pressed return on the keyboard. And there's also a stuma, which is a closed break where it's as if the sofer pressed tab on the keyboard. Okay, and it makes it's as a Torah reader, it's much easier to find an aliyah that begins at one of those breaks because you're not just finding a random word, and it's certainly easy to find a parsha. And Vayechi is not that way. The word Vayechi, as was seen, as Mark tried to find it, is just the next word on the line from the last word of Parshat Vayigash, no break, right? And as you know, there's no punctuation in the Torah, so it's just the last sentence of Vayigash, the next word is Vayechi. And unless you know exactly where it is in the column, it's hard to find. It's easier to find if you're dealing with a Vav Torah. Anyone know what a Vav Torah is, Larry?
Every column begins with a vav.
Except for?
Oh, I don't know the exception.
Yes, you do.
Breshit.
Right. So a Vav Torah is a certain standardized way of a sofer composing a scroll where, since many, many words begin with Vavs anyway because of the grammatical construction called Vav HaYipuch, which basically denotes continuing ongoing activity by beginning the word with a vav, it's hard to translate into English. It's as if it begins, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, but it's often not translated with the and, right? Since many words begin with a vav, it became commonplace that the way to standardize writing a Sefer Torah is that the first column begins with a bet, obviously, and then every column after that begins with a vav, and the same vav. And most tikkunim that you use to practice Torah reading are printed to line up with the standard Vav Torah. So I happen to know that a Vav Torah, Vayechi, is about 2/3 of the way down, and the word Vayechi is in the middle of a line. I can find it pretty easily. If I were trying to find the beginning of Parshat Vayechi in a non-Vav Torah, we have a couple of non-Vav Torahs, it's a lot harder because you have to orient yourself on the page. Okay. With that in mind, I want to look at the verse itself. Right? That's hard to find the life? Yes. It could be a commentary. Anything that sounds like a commentary could be a commentary, even if it's an unintentional one. Okay. So Vayechi is the 12th and last parsha of the book of Breshit. And kind of like Chayei Sarah, which is named after the life of Sarah, but is about the death of Sarah. And, of course, the naming of parashot are not thematic. It's just the first word or set of words in the parsha that kind of stand out. This parsha is called Vayechi because the first word is Vayechi, and Vayechi means and he lives. But, of course, it's the parsha in which Yaakov dies. And it's also the parsha in which Yosef dies at the very end. Okay, let's look at the actual verse. And if you're in my Rashi class, you know this prompt. Read this verse as if you're reading it for the first time, and don't think about answers, think about questions. And don't try to think about answers to your questions as you're thinking about the questions. Just what questions could one ask on this verse if you were being really pikeyun about the way it's constructed? Vayechi Yaakov, Jacob lived, be'eretz Mitzrayim, in the land of Egypt, Shvas Reishana, 17 years, right? And just to interpolate, 17 years since what? No, this is Jacob. 17 years since the reunion, right? 17 years since the reunion we read about. So after all those years pining for his son in the land of Canaan, he gets to Mitzrayim and he gets another nearly 2 decades. Vayehi Yemei Yaakov. I don't know why it's written as Yemai. That's a misprint in Sefaria. It's Yemei. Vayehi Yemei Yaakov. And it was that the days of Yaakov, Shnei Chayav, the years of his life, Sheva Shanim, were 7 years, Va'arbaim Uma'at Shana, and 40 and 100 years, which add up to 147. The one question you don't need to ask is why biblical ages are written that way. That's just commonplace. You got the singles digit, the tens digit, and the hundreds digit, right? I guess you could ask that question, but that's a pretty common question. Okay, what kind of questions arise from looking at that verse either in Hebrew or in English?
What happened during that time?
All right, so we're being told that he gets 2 decades of life. Is this kind of just we fast forwarded to this moment? Is it not interesting for us to understand what happened during that time period? What else?
17 full years? Did he die on his birthday? Is that what you're saying?
Or-
In the middle of the 17th year of his living in Egypt?
Good. How precise is 17? Did he die on the day that he arrived in Egypt? Did he die on his birthday? Are these round numbers? Good. And 17, right, it's not an iconic number, so it seems precise, right? It's not 120, it's not 40, it's not 7. So something about that 17 makes us think that the Torah really wants us to think it's 17 because it's not one of those numbers that appear all the time. What else? Questions?
Is there any significance to 130 years not in Egypt as a number, 130?
Okay, so if we do the math, that he lived 17 in Egypt, he had a total 147. Are we to make something of the 130 he lived in the land of Canaan? Of course, not all of that was in the land of Canaan because he spends all of Parshat Vayetze out of the land of Canaan. There's an odd construction in the second line. Vayehi Yemei Yaakov Shnei Chayav. And it was that the days of Yaakov, the years of his life, were 147 years, right? We could have said that simpler, right? So you could ask the question, why is it written, why it could have been, and it was that the years of his life, or it was the days of his life. What's the significance that it was that the days of Yaakov, the years of his life, were 147? Yes, Larry?
The Vayachi, he lived, as opposed to another verb that would say that he dwelled.
Oh, okay. Why even that verb? If we're talking about just geography, it could be Vayagor. He lived there, right? Or Vayeshev, like he dwelt there, like we have in Parshat Vayeshev, right? So are we, the readers, supposed to be reading into the fact that the verb chosen is a Vayechi? Okay. We could go on, but just wanted to put some questions on the table. Any other questions that are burning for you? Okay. Look at the source 2. This is Breshit Rabbah. This is one of many, many places in rabbinic literature where a version of this midrash appears. Rashi quotes it almost entirely as well. But I decided to bring you the original. Vayechi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim. And Yaakov lived in the land of Egypt. The first thing the midrash goes to is not to content of the verse, but image of the verse as it appears in the column. We discussed it before. Lama parasha zo. Why is this parsha stuma? What does stuma mean? Closed, hidden, occluded. Mikol haparashiot shel Torah. Why is it more closed off and hard to find than any of the other parsha of the Torah? So the first thing the midrash asks, this is the first midrash on this verse, is not what does it mean to live? What are we supposed to understand from the years? But I, reader, look at this column and I say, why is it so dark hard to find Vayechi? What are we supposed to be learning from the fact that Vayechi is stuma, closed off? And the Midrash, in very sort of classic language, gives 3 very, very quick answers. Ella, kevan sheniftar avinu Yaakov, hitchila shiabud Mitzrayim al Yisrael. The first answer is that once our father Yaakov died, the shiabud, the enslavement that would take place in Egypt for our people began. So the closedness of the parsha is a metaphor for the walls of Egypt closing in, right? We're still in Breshit here. We readers know what's happening, right? But imagine if it's possible, it's very hard to do this, reading this for the first time, you don't know what's happening. You don't know that Joseph's going to die in a few chapters. You don't know that in chapter 1, verse 8 of the book of Shemot, we're going to get the verse, Vayakom melech hadash al Mitzrayim asher lo yadad Yosef. There's a new king arose over Egypt, didn't know Joseph. You don't know that he's going to create a pretense for enslaving the Israelites. We don't know things are going to get bad because if we read it for the first time and we don't know Jewish history, we like to think that the present day peace can sustain itself, right? The American Jews of the 1980s could not have predicted year 2025, right? You didn't know that things were going to be closing in, but it's almost like a hint. It's like, do you remember the backwards Bet on the backwards B on the sign of walking into Auschwitz, Larry? Right? There's a sign when you walk into Auschwitz 1. It says in German, Arbeit macht frei, work makes you free. The B in the word Arbeit is upside down. Maybe, right? We don't know, right? It's hard to believe that the German engineers would have permitted such an oversight. We believe that it was kind of a sign of spiritual resistance that the Jewish metal workers who were tasked with making that sign decided to flip the B to let people walking on that sign know that sign is a lie. Work does not make you free. You're doomed. Maybe that would have given some indication that they should get out of there if they can. Maybe. That's almost what the Midrash is saying here. Here we're talking about Yaakov thriving in the land of Egypt. Stuma. That expanse, that revach, that openness, it is going to collapse on you. It's sort of like a sermonette on all of Jewish existence. We were talking about this earlier. We were walking home from shul. There's a little sticker on the median on Wilshire, as you're crossing Wilshire and San Vicente. What did it say?
Aliyah now.
Something about the diaspora, right?
We have to leave it before it leaves us.
Something like that, right? Someone put a sticker on a little sign, Aliyah now. We have to leave the diaspora before it leaves us. Some people would consider that to be chicken littleism. We talked about the fact that the Zionist patriarch of our family, Dr. Yisrael Adad, believed that was the truest truth of all of Jewish history. That all galut, all diasporas are doomed. The more it feels comfortable, the more you're duping yourself into thinking that it's going to last. It's all going to end up in the land of Israel, whether by choice or by force. On some level, that's what's being said in this one line of Midrash. Yes, Larry. Take the microphone because there are people on Zoom. Let's take it off. It's easier to pass if it's off the thing.
This is just a question of clarification. So, am I to assume that when Bereshit Rabbah was written, already we had two things: the division of the Parshiot, and we also had the convention of writing a Sefer Torah. So at this time, Vayechi would have been closed, would have been hidden.
Absolutely. Bereshit Rabbah is dated to about 4th, 5th, maybe even 6th century CE. Most of it written in Babylonia. And from what we understand, first of all, it's sort of clear from the way it's written, but what we understand from scholarship sources, yes, the notion of a Torah scroll looking more or less like what a Torah scroll looks now, the division of the parashot with names attached to it, already known. Yeah. Could the same be said for Rabbi Akiva's time? Harder to know. But a significant amount of the rhythm and the division of Jewish liturgy that we take for granted now was pretty much in place 1,1600 years ago. Okay, that's one answer given to the stumaness, to the closed-offness of the Parsha. Davar acher, another thing. Lama hi stuma, why is it blocked off? Mipnei shebikesh Yaakov avinu legalot et haketz, because Yaakov wished to reveal the end. This is very terse language. What does it mean that he wanted to reveal the end? Fill in the gap. What end did he want to reveal and to whom? While you're thinking about it, the Midrash answers, he wanted to do that, whatever it is, v'nistam menu. It was blocked off from him, the clairvoyance that he sought. The ability to see into the future that he sought was blocked off, and so our looking at the Parsha being blocked off is a parallel to Yaakov's prophecy being blocked off. What did he want to reveal, Larry?
presumably he knew the prophecy that I think it was to Abraham, right? For 400 years they'd be in prison, but they come back to the land of Israel. So he wanted to know, are we coming back?
Okay, so it could be that this end that he wants to reveal is local and circumstantial to the story, that some people read it that way, and some people read it a little bit more esoteric, that he wanted to ask from God for the revelation of all of the answers about how all of this is going to end up. End of times, eschatology, right? The Midrash kind of reading into biblical stories a messianism that didn't exist. There was no messianism in the biblical stories, from what we understand. But the Midrash says maybe Yaakov had these yearnings for the answers to the question about the end of time. And by the way, if you know Parshat Vayechi well, at the end of Parshat Vayechi, he blesses all of his sons, right? And he sort of does a version of this. He gives them like blessings, prophecies about what tribes are going to emerge from them. So he got a little bit of this, but he wanted all of it, like Moshe asking God, show me your face, and God saying, no, you can't see me and live. Yaakov says, please God, I'm on my deathbed. It's really a very evocative thing, right? Can you imagine knowing that your eyes are closing soon for the last time? Your brain's going to turn off. You want to have all the answers. And even Yaakov Avinu was told by God, Satum, you're closed off. You don't get that. Moshe's not going to get it in the future, and you're not going to get it now. So the Midrash says, you wonder why this Parsha is blocked? Because Yaakov wanted to be unblocked, and God says, no, you're blocked. Okay? It's amazing what the Midrash can say in just a few words. And the third, Devar Acher, Lama Histuma, why is the Parsha blocked off? And this is the lead-in answer to the next pieces we're going to read. Mipnei shesatam, same root. Excuse me. Mimeno kol tzarot sheba'olam. The reason why the text is blocked off is because there's an unmentioned male singular subject who's the unnamed male singular subject? God. That God, Satam, blocked off from Yaakov, Kol Tzarot Sheba'olam, all of the tsuras of the world. What could that possibly mean? Is this a positive thing or a negative thing? What does it mean that God blocked off, stopped from him, all of the troubles in the world? What do you think that means, Larry? Microphone.
Well, it can be both, but it's a blessing not to know the tsuras that you're going to face and the world's going to face tomorrow and the day after tomorrow and the year after tomorrow. If you knew all the horrible things that eventually will happen, you'd have a hard time going on.
Right. It seems sort of positive. It's almost as if the Midrash is saying, you think it's a bad thing that this Parsha is blocked off? You think it's a bad omen? The first two explanations are sort of in that realm. No, this is God protecting Yaakov. That Yaakov was boxed in and held and cradled, and even when things were rough, Yaakov didn't experience it as rough. Even when the world was closing in on him, somehow his relationship with God, this is connected a little bit to what I said this morning, his spiritual relationship protected him. He wasn't blocked off. He was enclosed. He was embraced. He was held. Right? He was swaddled, as it were. This Parsha is swaddled because Yaakov was swaddled by God, and even the hard stuff wasn't so hard. Okay, so those are three explanations, the rabbis responding to the visual nature of Parshat Vayechi. Okay, look at source number 3. This is Abarbanel. Abarbanel, the classic Spanish medieval commentator who lived through the Inquisition of Spain, ended up becoming a significant Jew in the Italian community. He lives from like the 1450s, 60s to the 1510s or 20s. This is an unintended connection. The cousin I mentioned before, the one who says that the diaspora is entirely temporary, he lived in Jerusalem for 50 years on Rehov Abarbanel. I did not intend that, but there you go. He classically, in his commentary, as it were, the Torah, all he does is ask questions. So on this verse, he has about 15 questions. but we're just looking at one of them. He doesn't do commentary the way Rashi does. He just gives voice to the questions and then lets us think about it. It's wonderful pedagogy, right? Just leaving the questions open. Hashelah ha'achat, the first question, ba'omro, when it says, Vayechi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim sheva esrei shana, when it says that Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. Ki acharei shezachar ha'katuv, after the verse mentions, Shaya Yaakov, bevo'o Mitzrayim, ben 130 shana, after earlier we were told, you can look it up, we know that he was 130 years when he got to Egypt. Ve'ata yizkor, and now we're being told, Shaya bichlal sheva va'arba'im u'mayat shana, that he lived to be 147. Okay, I have an abacus, right? Slide rule. Let's see. He lived to be 147. He was 130 when we got here. Carry the one. I can deduce that he lived 17 years in Egypt. Why is it so significant for the Torah to do the math for me? He says that. Matzora chaya, what was the need? Lahodia, to inform, shechaya b'Mitzrayim, that he lived in Egypt, shvas reishana. They lived there 17 years. Ki hu davar mevu'ar, it's obvious. Mimasha zachar, from what was mentioned. So Barbanel is focusing on the math to focus us on thinking there must be something significant to that 17. Because if it wasn't significant, the Torah is calling us math dummies by giving us this information. This must be something significant. Remember I mentioned before, it maybe invites us to imagine those years are precise because it's not an iconic number. He's saying it's more than precision. There's got to be some mystery there. Turn the page. We'll look at two similar Hasidic commentaries on this verse. Not in direct relationship to Barbanel's question, but I'd like to presume that they knew his questions and or they were sensitive to the same issue. The first is Rabbi Simcha Bunim of Pshischa, which I just love saying. Okay? Vayechi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim shvas reishana. Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. Hashanim halalu, those 17 years, those 17 years whose number we would have known if we could just do simple math, hayu shenot yagon v'tsa'ar. Those are not easy years. They were years of travail and surus and pain. Why? You might think, why would they have been so painful, right? I mean, his son was the vice president. They were given the land of Goshen to settle in. Why? We wouldn't, our natural assumption, who said this before? You think you said it before, right? What happened in those 17 years? Our natural presumption would have been those were halcyon years, lovely years, right? He escaped the famine. He had access to the palace. What could be so bad? Rabbi Simcha Bunim says those were actually awful years. Yerida me'eretz Yisrael. They left the land of Israel. Hayeshiva b'Mitzrayim, the beginning of the dwelling in Egypt, which we know is going to last. Reshit Hagalut, it's the beginning of the diaspora. Awful stuff. Aval Yaakov kibel alav et hadin. Jacob received this ruling, the judgment of having to live outside the land of Israel. V'yet hayisurin, and he accepted the suffering be'ahava, with equanimity, with love. And now here's the play, here's the game. Vayechi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim. Jacob lived in the land of Egypt. Ki ilu hayu kol hashanim halalu. As if all of those years, Shvasrei is not a number. Shvasrei is not a number according to the Rabbi Simcha Bunim of Pshischa. Shvasrei is gematria. Kiminyan, 17 is the numerology of Tov. Tet is 9. Vav is 6, Bet is 2, add them up, you get 17, L'siman Tov. So Simcha Bunim says back to Abarbanel, says back to the verse, we didn't know this, we didn't need to know this information for math. We could do that. We needed to be reinforced that for all the years that Jacob was living outside the land of Israel, when things could have been rough, things could have been hard, things could have been a source of pain, for him they were Siman Tov, Tov. 17, Tov. If you live in the world of numerology and gematria, it's an instant association. If you live like us, where it's sort of like a fun, occasional esoteric game, it doesn't click. But if you live in that world, it's an instant click. You're like, oh, yeah, that works. That works really well. Tov, 17, I get the game. Look at the next one. Sfat Emet, another Hasidic rabbi of the Gerer Hasidic dynasty just outside of Warsaw. Similar idea, a little bit different. Shvas Reishana, 17 years, Kiminyan, Tov, is like the amount of the word Tov. Tov, the numerology of Tov, ends up to be 17. Lomar Lacha, to tell you, Ki Yaakov, this is a very hard phrase to make sense of. Yaakov Berer Kol HaTa'arovet. There's a lot built into that. The verb livarer, in simple meaning, means to clarify or to separate. It also has halachic significance. It's one of the things that you can't do on Shabbat. You can't do berur on Shabbat. You can't separate the wheat from the chaff. You can't take the good stuff and pull out the bad stuff. Although in the nitty-gritty of halakha, you can pull the good stuff out of the bad stuff. You just can't pull the bad stuff out of the good stuff, right? So people who take this halakha very seriously, how they, like open up a bag of lettuce and take out separate which stuff is going into the salad, which stuff is not. Some people will only remove the good pieces of lettuce and put it in the bowl and not remove the bad pieces of lettuce, because that would be berur. That would be a separating out. Ta'arovet is a mixture. You see in the word ta'arovet the root eruv ayin reish bet. Eruv is a mixture, right? Like an eruv is a kind of a line around the houses of a neighborhood that makes a mixture of all of them. I translated here as an admixture. Ta'arovet also has halachic significance, and you can be certain that the Sfat Emet is using that language because he's speaking to a firm crowd. And he's speaking to a crowd who, when they hear the word levarer, they understand the laws of berur on Shabbat. And when they hear the word ta'arovet, they're thinking of all of it. The laws of ta'arovet. The laws of ta'arovet are the mixtures of hilchot ta'arovet. What mixtures are Jews very careful to avoid? Meat and milk, right? Or treif and non-kosher, or treif and kosher, right? Mostly meat and milk. Hilchot ta'arovet. What it means here is something like Yaakov was adept, skilled at dividing up and separating into the proper categories all things that had been mixed up, right? Think about that. This goes back to creation as well, right? Tohu and vohu is ta'arovet. It's a mixture of everything. This is null and void. What does God do? He puts this here and that here. Land, water. Day, night. Heavens, earth, right? God is someone who is mivarer ta'arovet, who is taking this chaotic inchoate admixture and dividing it into things, right? Yaakov is doing the same thing. He is very adept at it, right? In fact, Rashi calls the chaos that preceded creation, the Aramaic word he gives for it is erbuvia, same root here, from ta'arovet, a mixture. She'ikar shel galut Mitzrayim. The principal idea of the diaspora in Egypt, parentheses, it is a common rabbinic theology, whether it's going to sit well with you or not, that suggests that our suffering, our exile, our torture has some celestial purpose, that God brings us to it for some reason. It's the reason why the rabbis understood that the destruction of the first temple was not the Babylonians' fault, it was our fault. The destruction of the second temple was not the Romans' fault, it was our fault. And that there's something we're supposed to be gaining or at least learning from our suffering and from our diaspora. And that the principle of the diaspora of Mitzrayim, haya levarer, to make distinctions, ta'arovet tovara, to somehow learn the real difference between good and evil. In an unhealthy society, good and evil are all mixed up, right? Things that are supposed to be good are thought of as evil and vice versa. I'm sure you can identify with some version of that. That's an unhealthy society. It's as if the rabbis are saying that the Israelites were sent into Egypt because whatever was happening in Canaan, they were in the right place, but the society wasn't good. They had mixed up good and evil. We send you to Egypt. You're going to learn the difference between good and evil when you're enslaved. So this is going to refine you, clarify things for you. I'm not saying this is a theology you have to lean into. I'm saying this is a common rabbinic theology. Ulachach nikra'ah, that's why the time in Egypt is referred to as Kor HaBarzel, an iron furnace. Look at source 6. This is a direct quote from the book of Devarim, when Deuteronomy is looking back on the time in Egypt. Ve'etchem lakach Adonai, Moses says that God took you, v'yotzi etchem, and took you out, mikur habarzel mimitzrayim, from the iron furnace that is Egypt. So the Sfat Emet is saying, why is Egypt referred to as an iron furnace? What happens to iron in a furnace? It melts and? Yeah, I'm not a metallurgist, but isn't there also like smelt, like it's a separating, right? You're extracting the ore. I may be using the words wrong, but there's also stuff that you're not going to use at the end, right? I forgot. Is it dross? Is that the word? What is it? Slag. Okay. So why else would Egypt be referred to as an iron furnace if it was not a furnace, a terribly hot, uncomfortable, awful furnace to be in, but whose awfulness was supposed to help us distinguish between Tov and Ra, because somehow our ancestors had forgot that. Back to source 5. Aval Yaakov Amar, but Jacob said, and now he's quoting Genesis 48, which is later on in Parshat Vayechi, which is also a song that is often sung to kids before they go to sleep. Hamalach hagoel oti mikora. Hamalach hagoel oti. Hamalach hagoel oti mikora. We sing that every year in Simchat Torah. We call up Kol HaNa'arim, all the children, for the anti-penultimate Aliyah on Simchat Torah morning. The messenger, the angel, who is going to redeem me from all evil, from chapter 48 of Breshit. Va'afilu b'Mitzrayim, even in Egypt, Yaakov experienced, lo haya lo maga imra. Jacob had no contact with evil, or the evil could have no impact on him. He didn't suffer from the evil. V'zo haita hachana le'gula, and that was a preparation for redemption. Now, in typical Hasidic commentary language, it's not 100% clear what he's saying. Right? Is he saying that Jacob was so refined, he didn't need to experience the true enslavement in Egypt because he didn't need to learn the lesson to make the distinction between good and evil because he knew it already? Is he saying that that Yaakov's relationship with God spared him from the harshness of Egypt because he was living in a realm of Tuv? Is it or Tov? Is it very similar to source 4, or is it not? It's hard to know, and we can't interview the Sfat Emet to ask him. But it has something to do with the fact that either Yaakov experienced the bad as tolerable, or had such an understanding of the way the world worked that he didn't need to be sent into the deepest blackness of the diaspora because he dies before the bad stuff happens. He got spared it because he didn't need to learn anything from it because he was above that. Right? Our ancestors in the Torah are set up for us sometimes as accessible role models and sometimes as inaccessible role models. Right? Sometimes they seem beyond our ability to touch, know, and emulate. Right? And sometimes we can access them and we can imagine ourselves trying to live as they did. If we take the last two commentaries, the Hasidic commentaries, it may be that source 4, Simcha Bunim, presents a more accessible role model in Yaakov than source 5, right? Saying that we cannot avoid the galuyot, the diasporas of our life, whether geographical or spiritual or emotional. We cannot avoid the harsh decrees, as I spoke about this morning. We cannot avoid being unmoored from things that are important to us and people that are important to us. But is it possible that all the years we spend in those places, all the moments that we spend under stress and anxiety, when the walls are closing in, it doesn't have to be 17 years for us to try to experience them or extract from them the tov. That's something we can aspire to. Doesn't mean it's easy to do. But if that's what we're being told Yaakov was good at, taking even the dark and experience it as light, taking even the harsh and experience it as tov, that's a positive spiritual lesson, particularly so in this generation, when there is a lot to be worried about, right? If you're like me, you're a little bit nervous to end your technology break when Shabbat is over and turn on the news and wonder what awful things happened in the world or to the Jews or in Israel in the last 25 hours, right? It's going to be something, and if it's not today, it's going to be tomorrow. We could live all of our moments as if we are in a Pharaoh-laden Egyptian diaspora. Or we can be like Yaakov Avinu and say, we're here, we're alive, we should be vigilant, and we should try to live with Tov. We should try to live with the goodness that is present, the goodness of one another and companionship and health and the ability to study Torah together and the ability to end Shabbat on time, which is why I will stop talking.
You've been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast website or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information on Temple Beth Am, Los Angeles, please visit www.tbala.org.